this computer. So this is a Know Your Rights presentation that is being presented by the Amend the 13th Movement to Abolish Slavery in America movement, as well as the National Lawyers Guild. And we have Cress Vellucci here representing the NLG, and I'm representing the Amend the 13th, as well as the Autonomous Infrastructure Mission. So I want to pass it on over to Cress. He's going to be giving some insight into the law, how it can be used to assist us in our activities, and how we can use it as a weapon instead of it constantly being used as a weapon against us. So, Cress, I'll let you take it away. And before I let you take it away, sorry, I do want to give a little introduction because Cress has been, as representative of the NLG, very instrumental in our activities here in Sacramento, in protesting and demonstrating and organizing in our community, starting for myself back in 2014, the murder of Mike Brown. We went in front of the Arden Mall. Some people unfortunately got trampled by horses that day. We've been through the struggle. We've had to deal with actually warrants and people coming to our house and threatening my own sister with arrest. I unfortunately was given a jaywalking ticket, which Cress and the NLG was nice enough to assist in my defense of, which was unsuccessful, but still was an example of the way that we can use the law to mobilize instead of letting it discourage us or stop our struggle. So, I just wanted to give that little context before we move into this presentation. And so, yeah, Cress, you can go ahead now and make sure you unmute yourself and let us know some things.
Okay, right. Well, first of all, I want to say that I'm not a practicing attorney, so this is not legal advice per se. It's largely anecdotal, and this will be very conversational. That's the way I do things. I just remembered your jaywalking ticket. And those horses were difficult. They have a very hot breath, I discovered, because I was out there with you people, so with people that were protesting. So I'm going to refer to my notes. I've done this a million times, but I just want to make sure I don't forget things. I will definitely leave a lot of time at the end of this for questions, because I've discovered that activists or just people in general have specific things they'd like to have answered. And if you have a full hour or whatever the time period is, they are very often cannot, they don't have time to ask the questions that are the most important to them. First thing I usually like to bring up is that law enforcement takes many forms, from, of course, your local police and sheriff's department to the highway patrol, wherever you might be, to security guards, even transit cops. So just be aware that it's not just the obvious people that are in today's world, National Guard, I guess. So again, law enforcement takes a lot of different forms. Campus police, I just thought of that. And the first thing I'd like to start off with is our police encounters. There's consensual, like if you walk out, a cop might say to you, hey, how about those Giants, or how about those Yankees? That's a consensual conversation. We discourage that at the National Lawyers Guild, and actually any lawyer will tell you that as well, because police are trained to engage with you in a consensual manner. So you think you're not giving them information, but anything you say to them, as the saying goes, can be used against you or your friends. So you don't have to walk away and be rude, but it's not advisable, especially at a demonstration or a situation where law enforcement is there with you. So that's my style. I'm very pleasant, but I'm not going to talk to them too long, because you can give them information that might hurt somebody in the end. Questions like, hey, why are you out here today? Where'd you travel from? Or so you just have to avoid those kinds of questions. Getting right into it, one of the first things that we like to teach people is that if you think you're being arrested or detained or something like that, ask the question. That's when you maybe can talk to law enforcement, and ask the question very pointedly. am I being detained? If they say you are not being detained, then you can, don't run away, but you can walk away. That's an important question to ask. It's also key to ask that question, because if you ask, am I being detained? Law enforcement will know that you know something about your basic rights. You don't want to come out there and start yelling, I know my rights, but ask key questions like that so they know that you know something. You might know a lot or you might know little, but that's an important question. I know I've been at demonstrations before where the police will say, hey, Cress, can you come over here and talk to us about what's going on here? And my first response is, and I'm just there as a legal observer, not as a participant, but my response will be, am I being detained? And they'll say, well, no, we just want to talk to you. Fine, you can come over here and talk to me with everybody else. So that's one of the key points that I always like to focus on, because it gives you some sort of knowledge of what's going on. By the way, if you're being detained, they will then tell you you're being detained. If you're being detained, just to explain that quickly, that means you're not under arrest. It means that they can hold you for a certain amount of time. The court cases are all over the place on this. So is it a half an hour, 5 minutes, 2 hours, half a day? We don't really know exactly, but it has to be reasonable. So they can determine whether or not you're the person they're looking for, or whether or not you've broken the law in some fashion. So you just have to be patient. And by the way, if you are detained, and you're not going to be quizzed later on this, but if you are detained, they can just do a basic search of you, not the full search that you might see on television or in the movies. They can do with it what is called if they have probable cause, they can do a pat down search. That means they can't go into your pockets. They can't go into your hair and look around. They can just do a pat down. Pretty basic. And it's important to note that. It's one of the things that we know when we're at demonstrations when people are arrested, that they are in fact not, the rights aren't abused. And we watch officers very specifically to see if they're violating their rights, because that can be used later in court if it comes down to that. I think. In fact, this is one of the things that actually I was unaware of, because 20 years ago, the laws have changed, because 25 years ago when I was in law school, things have changed. If you're about to be detained or arrested, please use these words. I do not consent to a search. Even if you think or somebody tells you that they have a right to search you, please say those words, and you have to say them. I do not consent to a search. Because under a case law today, it's presumed by the courts that if you don't specifically say those words, then you've consented to a search. And I was unaware of that myself, because again, 20 something years ago, that wasn't the law, but it is the law today, more or less. So just use those words, I do not consent to a search. I think. So that takes care of detainment. Then of course you have the arrest situation. All I can say to people, and I've seen this a million times at protests, it seems like it's not, but I'm not quite that old, but if you're being arrested, don't resist. I think I've seen this as it's a natural response when police grab somebody's arm to resist. And they'll charge resisting for doing anything. If you look at them cross-eyed, literally, they will charge you with resisting. You do not want to have that on your record, an arrest, let alone a conviction. Because an officer in the field, if they confront you in the future at some point, they'll only see in California PC 148, which is resisting. They don't know if you slugged the cop or if you did whatever. All they can see is a 148. So you want to try to avoid that at all costs. That's why we have lawyers. During Occupy, which is now almost 10 years ago, we had 38 pro bono criminal law lawyers here in Sacramento. We had 110 arrests. No one was convicted. Nobody went to trial, actually. But that's our job, or the job of the National Lawyers Guild or the ACLU or any pro bono attorneys. It's our job to basically defend you in court. So if they violate your rights, let them do it. Just make note of it. Hopefully, today everyone's got a cell phone camera, among other things. Then, as we've seen with the recent Chauvin trial for killing George Floyd, these videos can make a difference. But just don't resist. Even you can't fight back. You're not going to win anyway. But if they violate your rights, and really, if they really violate your rights, then you can sue later and maybe get some compensation.
Yeah, and I just wanted to, give a point on that. And there's been a few experiences that we've had in Sacramento during protests where the NLG has kind of been there. And I guess it's important to recognize that NLG and knowledge of the law is not going to stop the police from breaking the law. So there's been times where we were in Roseville, which is a suburb of Sacramento, in front of the busiest mall, the Galleria, and we had NLG people there observing the police arrest somebody for crossing the street. And we're saying to the NLG like, hey, like, hey, like, hey, but they're kind of like, yeah, like we're doing what we can do. We can observe and be there for the court case afterwards that's going to declare this an illegal arrest and get the case dropped. In the moment, the people on the ground, the protesters, the people are the only ones who are going to keep the people safe. We'll just keep it short at that. The job of the NLG is to make people aware of their rights, aware of the law, and to be there again for that court case that eventually comes. And also as legal observers, to be those third-party witnesses that are able to testify objectively on that person who's been unjustly, accosted. So that I just wanted to kind of give that distinction, and yeah, let you continue from there.
No, that's actually a good point. You just reminded me that actually I was there that day. What was kind of just to, of course, point out the obvious, I crossed the street as well. And the person that was arrested said, "Hey, why'd they arrest me and not you?" And I said, "Hey, man, you have a different color skin than I do. It's pretty obvious. They didn't arrest me; they arrested him." And I will say later on, the captain that was out there said, "I said, the protesters are going to be." He said, "Well, they're marching. They're going to march down to the jail." I said, "Yeah, that's what usually happens." And he said, "Well, how do we avoid that?" I said, "Well, I can't give advice to you." I said, "But if it were me, and I mean, just theoretically, I'd release him right now. But that's not normally what we do. But since he asked me, I just suggested, and he was released right away. And the case was dismissed. But I've seen a number, and I cover the courts now for a court publication, a daily publication, and as a reporter. And I've seen case after case where there's no underlying charge, but the main charge becomes resisting arrest. So they probably went to question somebody, maybe they grabbed him or her, and they resisted, quote unquote, theoretically. He's accused of that, or she's accused of that. So, so the charge then becomes resisting. So it's just, we can get them later on. And the police know that when they see legal observers, whether they're with the NLG or whomever, they know that we're there for one reason, to watch them. And they know why we're watching them, to get their badges, to get their names, to find out anything we can about them, because then they become a how can I say it nicely, but they become an offender in a civil and or a criminal case. So that's our job. Our job is not to take part in the protest as much as we'd like to. When I was trained 10 years ago to do these trainings, I remember the individual that taught me said, as much as you're tempted, if you're a former activist, which I am, to take off your hat as an NLG observer and say, no, this is how you do it, you can't do that. So you won't catch us giving legal advice per se out in the field, but we are watching the cops very closely and what they're doing and how they're acting, what kind of weapons they're carrying. That's what we
And
do.
yeah, and another question that I had before you continue on your presentation here is, I've seen across the country, here in Sacramento, elsewhere, of instances of law enforcement concealing their badge number and their name. And it's everyone's understanding that this is actually illegal. How would this be approached by the NLG and potential legal observers?
One of the projects that we've talked about but have not engaged with here in Sacramento, kind of done it informally, is to file police complaints against the police. In fact, individuals can do it. So if you see an officer, or if you're aware of an officer, and get it recorded, them refusing to give you their name or badge number, record that. You can file a complaint online actually with the officer. It doesn't hurt to do that because then it goes on their record. Most of them know it's the policy of their department to do this. I was at a Black Lives Matter protest 3 years ago, and there were 48 CHP officers guarding the freeway. And unfortunately, I was the only legal observer there. And all but one person gave me their badge or name. One person did not. He actually covered up his name, like you said. And I said, you realize that you have to respond, your name or badge number. He says, I don't want you to know that. I said, well, I don't have the best memory in the world, but you have now forced me to memorize your name because I saw it before you covered it. And I'll never forget your name. And he said, oh yeah, what is it? And seriously, I'll tell you what his name was. Poole, Poole. I'll never forget that because he's forced me to remember it. I should have reported him myself, but I did not. There's been so many protests since. It's one of those little things that some of us tend to forget to do, but it's important to file complaints against these officers. You can do it online. And one of these days, the Bill of Rights for police here in California will change. So that will become more of a public record that we can use in different ways. Okay, so let's go back to the basics. I'm almost done with this part of it. I'll look at my cheat sheet here so I don't forget anything, you guys. Oh, one small point. I'm always being asked this. The police do not have to read you your rights when they arrest you. It's not like television. It's not like the movies. Everyone thinks they have to read you your rights, and if they don't read you your rights, then the charges will be dismissed. No, it doesn't work that way. They technically only have to read you your rights if they're about to question you. So they take you back to the station or wherever. They should. I'm sure they always claim that they have read your rights, but they do not have to do that. So don't count on that. The only way, and I'll get into this right now because so I don't forget it. Most basic thing is that don't talk to the cops. I've given a number of these workshops. I would say not hundreds, but certainly dozens and dozens and dozens. And the next day I see the same people I did the workshop with talking to the cops. That old thing that you do see with your Miranda rights on television and in movies. Everything you say can and will be used against you. That is totally true. One of the things that the complaints I get from attorneys that work with us, and I was with the ACLU before the National Lawyers Guild, but is why did the activists talk to the cops? Because that hurts them in court. It hurts everybody in court. Makes the job of the attorney much more difficult potentially. So we produced a card. One of my I think better ideas. The front side, I'm not sure if you can see this, it's reversed or not, but the front side is, of course, National Lawyers Guild. On the back side, it has the basic, I'm not sure if you have these, Jamir. I still have a bunch left. I should get some to you. But I've been in isolation. Yeah, okay. So what it says in the back is to law enforcement. The bearer of this card wishes to remain silent, declines to answer questions without an attorney present, and does not consent to any search. Now you do have to read this to them, so I guess you're talking to them kind of. You have to actually say these things out loud, but at least if they have their body cams on, it should show, and hopefully there's somebody recording the conversation or the arrest. But I did this because I want people to not forget the basics. But if you do talk to the police, at least say this to them: you don't consent to the search, and you don't wish to speak to them without an attorney present. Because they will try to engage you, especially if you're like you are, Jamir. If you're an organizer, that's who they want to talk to. This is all common sense kind of stuff. But as an activist reminded me once in Minnesota, by the way, I used to travel around the country doing these kinds of workshops, and smart guy, he was a university student, but he said, I kept using the word, I tried not to use common sense anymore because of him. Because he stood up and said, I have a question. Don't some people have more common sense than others? Yeah, he's right. Some of us have more or less common sense. I'm not even sure what it even means anymore. I think my parents taught me that. But it's just learned behavior, I think, or just gut feelings. But yeah, just talking to the police. I see people yelling at the police. There's no advantage to that. And you mentioned this earlier, Jamir. Police do not know the law. I mean, they act like they do, but they don't know the law. I see it time and time again. Um, Quick anecdote: I was at an anti-war protest in the 2000s, Afghan and/or Iraq war protest. A bunch of veterans, and the police said, we're going to arrest you for trespassing, uh, violating my own rules. I was an activist that day, so I could do anything I wanted to do. But I just said, so what? I know that's 602. I said, what subsection? There's like 20 subsections for trespassing. And the officer goes, has a little cheat sheet, and he goes, I was thinking K, and I said, K really doesn't work, but whatever. And he goes, well, how about L? I said, I wouldn't use that one either. And he goes, what would you suggest? He actually said that to me. What would you suggest the subsection I use to arrest you? And I said, I'm not going to help you with that. They huddled and they left. So I'm not suggesting that you do that, but it's just an example. They do not know the law. Some of them may think they do, but they do not. However, you should know as well that if they arrest you for trespassing, 602, it doesn't mean if they have some kind of probable cause, it could be a good arrest. It doesn't mean that when it gets to the DA, they can't amend the complaint to be, I don't know. I've seen people arrested for jaywalking, interestingly enough, or pedestrian in a roadway. When they got to court, it was something much more involved than that. Burglary, um, trespassing, other more serious charges. So it doesn't really matter, I think, all that much, but it does make a difference from a probable cause standpoint. Anyway, it's getting into too much legal stuff, but it's just real important for people. If you get anything out of this at all, please avoid talking to the police. They don't know the law. They're not really important. The DA is what's important, and the pressure you can put on the system from there. And by the way, for the record, Jameer did not jaywalk that day that I saw. So I was prepared to be your witness, but the judge wouldn't allow witnesses. But it was a bizarre experience in traffic court. Now we know what happens in traffic court. I really didn't know. I had never really been there before. So I think I covered the arrest thing. I mentioned the Miranda rights. I mentioned searches. Again, use that phrase, I don't consent to a search. You should mention that the arrest warnings, people think that they have to give arrest warnings to you before they arrest you, like they were doing that evening out at Ard Mall that you were talking about. They don't have to do that at all. They can just arrest you. I mean, I've always believed that law enforcement wants to avoid arrest at most times because it means a lot more paperwork to them. So if you can leave, they can go home to their families and not have to do any more work or any work at all. So, so don't think they have to give you that warning. I was looking at my notes here. It says the police misconduct. Do not expect the police to tell the truth or follow the law. Yeah, they don't tell the truth. They can lie. That's another thing that's changed over the last few decades is that before, if they lied, we actually were able to, in my activist days back in the 80s and 90s or so, we actually could ask people at a meeting, see we're having a meeting right now, but not on Zoom, in person. I could actually ask somebody who I suspected of being law enforcement, are you now or have you ever been a member of any law enforcement agency? They actually had to answer truthfully. It's all changed. I hate to keep saying these things, but things have changed. So things aren't getting better, as we all know. People that are younger than me you guys are lucky because you get to see things hopefully get better. I've seen things generally go from here to here. For people of color, it's been the same crap all along. So I think that's pretty much it. But I think, but generally in the courts have just gotten worse and worse and worse, and the cases are worse and worse. But hopefully they get better for all of you as you move along here. So free speech. I don't know why I even have this in here in my old notes. Oh yeah. So I'm sure Jameer and I have had these conversations, but you do not need a permit to do a demonstration, especially if you're on the sidewalk. And they can declare it unlawful assembly, but I'm still waiting for that to happen, by the way, to have them actually make arrests because people didn't leave an area. Those cases have all been dismissed by the DA, probably because the DAs know that those are usually not lawful arrests. Jameer, were you arrested at the Fab 40s protest?
Yes, yeah. So we were demonstrating there against the decision of the DA to not indict the cop that killed the two cops that killed Stephon Clark. So at the end of the demonstration, as everyone was leaving, we were all on the sidewalk, and the police decided to follow us and then trap us on the sidewalk on the overpass there. And the rest is history, as they say. But a lot of people essentially, were traumatized, brutalized, and a lot of people had things taken from them in those hours of arrest that they could never really get back. Fortunately, rather, we did win that lawsuit. There was a settlement. There is going to be cash that's given, some couple years later. But again, like I said, just like every time the police fire tear gas and rubber bullets at people, it really takes something away that can't be given back. So, yeah.
Yeah, that was, I mean, I was there and I wasn't arrested. Our legal observers were arrested. One was a judge, an administrative law judge. She was arrested. I'm only smiling because he goes, "Why weren't you arrested?" And I realize now that the police didn't do me a favor, because if you guys don't get a cash settlement, I don't get anything. But I was there, but some officer in the dark across the bridge yelled at me, yelled my name and said, "Hey, are you a legal observer or are you a reporter tonight?" I can't even remember what I said. I think I said I was a reporter, but they arrested reporters too. They had a Sacramento Bee reporter and two or three other reporters were also arrested. Um, so, so I was not arrested. And I don't know whether the guy thought he was doing me a favor. I don't know why they would have arrested everybody else. There were a number of people that were arrested that, I mean, members of the clergy were walking past me. I guess I was walking too slow. And they said, "Oh, well, I was just on the phone with the mayor." I'm not going to give any names out here. I was just on the phone with the mayor. I was just on the phone with Chief Hahn. Nothing's going to happen. Next time I saw them, they were handcuffed. So it was really bizarre. Uh, if you're observing it, it's just kind of a bizarre situation. Um, but so you can see how these things can happen as long as you remain calm. I mean, you're right. People lose things. I've been beaten by cops at protests as a legal observer. But again, I sued myself and handled the suit myself, and I got three officers fired. Well, they were encouraged to leave, shall we say? I don't think they were fired, from what I remember. But so there's things that some of us can do, but you have to have a certain amount of money, or you have to know attorneys. It shouldn't be that way, but it is. So all we can do to protect ourselves really is to know our basic rights, talk and count on other organizations that do legal things, legal support things, like the NLG, ACLU, and just there's a number of attorneys in Sacramento. We're lucky here, and I imagine in most other cities where there are attorneys who have not forgotten why they went to law school, and that's how I usually get pro bono attorneys. I remind attorneys that when they went to law school, they probably had dreams. Most of them had dreams of doing the right thing, helping people, and in the midst of paying back their loans, taking care of their family, they just weren't able to actually realize some of those dreams. So I remind them of what those dreams were, and they're very willing, at least in Sacramento, and I think most everywhere else. If you remind them of these things, that they're quite willing to do pro bono, free legal work to help activists. But a lot of this we have to do ourselves. Again, you can have official legal observers, as we discovered in the Chauvin case, as he was killing George Floyd. Just what was it? A 17-year-old girl was driving by. Person was driving by, I should say, and started recording. She had the longest recording. She stood there quietly and recorded, and you can see the effects of that in that case and in any case. So anyone can do that. You don't have to be an official legal observer. We just need a record that we can take into court and proceed from there. But again, if you are arrested or you think you might be arrested, do not talk to the police if you can avoid it, other than declaring, as I mentioned, that you won't speak to them without an attorney present. I think we have a little bit of time here. I was going to do a little bit, if you don't mind, Jameer, a couple of advanced type, I call it advanced stuff. Well, I think I really have covered, like if you are arrested, what to do. Do not resist, as I mentioned. Uh, in Sacramento anyway, it's usually 6 to 8 hours, usually, in jail before you are released, because they have a lot of paperwork and they're slow in the jail here. And I've been around the country to some degree in most jails. I remember I had somebody in Texas once say to me, it's different here in Texas. You know what? It wasn't different. Well, people in New York, when I was doing legal work for around the country, they would say, you know, it's different here in Syracuse. You know what? It wasn't. It's pretty uniform, largely because police agencies go through the same training. There are people that give this training around the country, and they move from one agency to the next. It might just be the mindset of law enforcement in general, but yeah, usually it's about 6 to 8 hours before you are released. By the way, if you are arrested, you might be, I think in your case, Jameer, because it was just an infraction, you were given a citation and released. But they could have taken you to jail, technically. It's like a speeding ticket. They could take you to jail, but they usually give you a citation and release you. That's still an arrest. The news media gets that wrong.
Well, yeah, well, there were 84 of us, so they had to take us into
Oh yeah, right.
Cal Expo and process us there,
Right.
and so yeah, that was.
I mean,
It was also extraordinary circumstances, and protest conditions and the way that police respond is always kind of dependent on the specific conditions in that area. So Sacramento is a good example just because we're the capital of California, but there's so many different circumstances out there and everything. But one kind of circumstance I wanted to ask if you could consider is one where folks are in a park and feeding the unhomed population or any community members, and the police begin to kind of harass them. What are some things that activists can do to prepare themselves to kind of counter that and remain in place and remain able to provide resources to the community?
Of course, I can't respond to that from a legal advice point of view from the NLG, but I will anecdotally talk about what I've seen that's been successful in those situations. Well, first of all, you want to make a record of what they're doing, of what police are doing. And we've had that situation happen here, Jameer, on a few years ago, more than, I mean, maybe 8 years ago, 8 or 9 or 10 years ago. People they maintained, they were willing to risk arrest. And all the police in the end this happened on more than one occasion. They're feeding the unhoused. And they made them move the tables to leave a little bit of room on the sidewalk for people to walk by, which is a law. I mean, you have to leave a little bit of room on the sidewalk so people, otherwise you can be arrested for blocking the sidewalk. Forgot the actual charge. So that's, in the end, that's all they wound up doing. I thought for sure they were going to arrest people because they're willing to risk arrest. They just kept feeding people in the park. So all I can say is just you can just record what's going on, and it's like, again, this is anecdotal, not an official NLG comment for what it's worth, but it's sort of like the movements in the past. Think of the civil rights movement. People were willing to risk arrest to fight the power, as they said, or we said in those days. And it's happened in many movements, not just the civil rights movement, but of course the suffrage movement, the anti-war movements. They're willing to risk arrest to do the right thing. And a lot of times I've noticed over the decades, police won't respond. I mean, they will actually leave you alone a lot of times. A lot of times they can respond differently, as we've seen. One of the speeches I usually give, and I'm kind of extending out, trying to give you a longer answer here, but is I used to say back in some rowdy days in my past at trainings, whatever you do, do not run from the police. Do not run. And the reason you don't want to run is, it's like a cat chasing a mouse. If the cat if that mouse doesn't move, the cat is not quite as aggressive. I see a lot of that. Like I gave that speech back in Georgia at a protest. Of course, it was Georgia, but The very long presentation lasted about 3 hours. And the next day we had 200 activists. The police actually were about to make arrests. I'm not sure they would have made arrests, but when people started running, when they ran, then they were tackled. They were hit with all sorts of things and batons, and they were arrested. It's just one of those things where, so if you're in the park, I'm going to go back to your example, and you feel strongly about what you're doing, you can make a decision to risk arrest, and hopefully your attorneys will go to court, or at least say they're going to go to court to help you fight those charges, if the district attorney even files. That's one of the things we've noticed a lot, is that, or certainly I've noticed a lot, is that the DAs are reticent to file in most cases, because they know they're not going to win. And with the DA, you have to win. If you have losses, that can affect your promotions or a lot of things. In their career, I've met with a number of former DAs, progressives, interestingly enough, who quit because they couldn't stand it anymore. But they've given me tips. One of the tips is make them work. So if you're arrested, if I'm arrested, if anybody's arrested, make them work, make them do the investigations, make them file the charges, make them think you're going to go to trial. Had a number of those cases here in Sacramento that have happened over the years. I'm not saying people were guilty, but there's a chance they were guilty. But the DA chose not to file or not to go to trial because it makes them work. And that's the advice I've been given by former district attorneys. No one, I guess, likes to work too much, but at least if you're on the right side, then maybe you have a reason to risk a few things. That's just going back to my time, where people were more willing to risk arrest just to make a statement. And I've done it myself. I mean, before I went to law school, and actually since I went to law school, I've been arrested at demonstrations, and I've yet to go to trial on any of those things because I was willing to go to trial. I was willing to use, and this goes way beyond NLG presentations, but I was willing to use as movements in the past, and I can only think of the civil rights movement because that's the best example, because it was during my era, the 60s and 70s. Because then you can use your court experience as a platform to talk about the wrongs that are in society. You also can gain respect even from law enforcement to some degree. I've noticed over the years, from some in law enforcement, there is some respect if people are willing to stand for what they believe in. I'm not telling people to go to jail or risk arrest. What I'm suggesting is that don't run from the cops normally. And that being said, I have to add a disclaimer, and that is I was doing one of these workshops a few years ago around the Stephon Clark protest, and I had an older woman of color who said, "But what if my grandson is in an alleyway with cops all around him and no one recording? What does he do then?" I said, "Well, the first rule really is be safe. And if you're a person of color, not a white guy like me, and you're in an alleyway with some racist cops, do whatever it takes to survive, and then we'll sort it out later on." But it was something I hadn't really mentioned before, and she really brought me back down to reality from that respect. By the way, one quick thing, the most basic thing in the world: identification. You do not have to provide identification to law enforcement unless you're using a motorized vehicle. So if you're just walking down the street and they ask for your ID, and there's reasons they ask for that, by the way. A, to find out who you are, but B, to see if you're on probation or on parole. Another way they can intimidate people, but you do not have to show your ID. Now, again, if you're in that alleyway, I would probably show my ID, especially if I was a person of color. Again, this white privilege thing is true. I mean, and again, if you're an old white person like me, there are even more advantages. Famous last words, right? Something will happen to me tomorrow, but you don't have to show. And I think that's an important thing, because again, they want to know who you are. They can then track you, even if you aren't on parole or probation. you're on parole or probation, I should mention probation or parole are dangerous for activists. Probation, at least going back to my day, and again, I'm not giving legal advice here, but probation is dangerous for an activist because I'll give you, again, anecdotal an example. People I was with, if they accepted probation, like say for 6 months or a year, I'm serious. We never saw them again. It's like they just got out of the flow of doing activism work because of their fear of if you're on probation, you could go back to jail or parole. So we had a rule, people that I worked with, again, anecdotally, the rule meaning an agreement among the activist circle I was with to avoid probation at all costs. So, I mean, I was charged on 3 occasions with conspiracy, felony conspiracy, for writing a press release for the protest. That's actually what happened. It's absurd on all 3 cases. I remember the DA talking to me and saying, well, we can drop this felony conspiracy down to a misdemeanor. I said, does it still involve probation? He said, well, yeah. I said, yeah, let's go to trial. Charges were always dismissed. And this, I don't hear activists talk that much about this today, about the dangers of probation. It can hurt your movement because people are then out of the mix. If you're on probation, you're not taking part in the protest, you're not taking part in organizing. So just it's a little thing, but it's also a very important thing that I think people just don't think about. They'll say, well, probation sounds good. Yeah, it does. You don't have to go to trial. You just take a deal, do some community service, and you're on probation for one. A lot of people, that's not going to make any difference, but a lot of other people, it will make a difference. I've seen it happen. Good activists that just disappeared because they were afraid of getting rearrested for probation violation. If you're on probation, you don't, and I cover these things now for the Vanguard, these cases. You don't, if you're on probation, if I'm on probation and I'm just walking down the street and they arrest me for, I can't imagine what it might be, but spitting on the sidewalk or some stupid thing like that. It doesn't matter whether I'm convicted or not. It's a violation of probation. I will go to jail immediately because it's on my record that I'm on probation. So you can see where they don't want to go out to a protest just to stand there, even because they might accidentally get arrested. And we know how that, we just discussed that earlier about the Fab 40s thing. You know, that these things happen, you can just get arrested. So it has a way of destroying movements. It's not just my opinion, but it goes way back to other movements. So yeah, I thought I mentioned that. And the ID thing, you don't have to show it unless it's a safety thing and you feel you have to really show it, but you really don't have to. I also personally don't believe in empowering the police. If they ask for your ID and you don't have to show that to them, then don't show it to them, because that empowers them versus empowering yourself because you know your basic rights, that you don't have to show your ID. But the mind has a pretty good picture of me, actually. So I think I've gone through a lot of these things. I know, I'm not sure if you have any questions. Sorry to ramble, but I tend to do that, as those who know me.
Well, yeah, I wanted to open it up to the 2 other folks we have on here, Sister Coco and Sister Teresa. If y'all had any questions, I guess now would be the time. And if not, that's also perfectly okay. And yeah, we can move on, or yeah. But yeah, if y'all have any questions.
I know that you must have a question, Teresa.
Well, I have an observation. I do agree with you that they've taken, even though they have so many of our brothers and sisters in jail, they also have so many who are surveilled now, who are still in cuffs, but just because they have a monitor or they have to have a weekly appointment or they're just being watched. So I agree that it is good to avoid that for sure. And my question was on the ID. What would you say is the best thing to say in response when they walk up and say, show me your ID? What would you say is the best response to that? The best response that maybe isn't confrontational, but just, kind of asserting your rights?
I
anyway.
mentioned earlier about the same with, so it's a similar question to the detainment question that you would ask police. That they say, hey, come over here, I want to see your ID, and you go, am I being detained? And in this case, I know what I would say, and I'm not sure this is the best thing to say. What I would say is, am I being detained? And why do you need to see the ID? I'm not driving a vehicle right now. I wouldn't say in the video I'll send you of Danny Garza doing his 2-hour presentation of this. He makes a big deal of the fact that you don't brag about knowing your rights. He acts it out. It's kind of funny, actually. It's actually very good. But say, don't say I know my rights. I know my rights. Simply ask certain questions so they know that you know your rights. And a question like, I don't think I have to show you my ID. That's probably what I would say. I don't think I have to show you my IDs. I don't think I'm driving a motorized vehicle right now. You never actually have to show your ID unless you're driving, like in a speeding ticket type of thing, using that as an example. Even if you're arrested, you don't have to show your ID. And this is an interesting story that I was arrested once in San Francisco many, many decades ago. Anyway, God, I feel old, but a person would not show his ID. He didn't bring it with him. An experienced activist from I think the 50s. This guy had been around forever. And I'm in jail, and an officer walked up to me and said, "This one guy doesn't have an ID. We can't release him." So that's the point. If they don't have your name, they can't easily release you because they can't do a search to see who you might be. You could be some wanted killer or something like that. So that's why I carry my ID in my back pocket when I go to a demonstration. Where I think things might be happening, like the Fab 40s thing, for example, I carried about 10 or 20 bucks cash, my ID, and that was it. I learned that a long time ago that you need just some basic stuff because I like to be ID'd so I can get out of jail. This individual, though, to be tough with the cops in San Francisco, chose not to bring his ID. And guess what his name was? Bob Smith. So it sounds like a phony name in the first place. How many Bob Smiths are there? That really was his name. But there was luckily a decent cop who said, we don't want to deal with this. It was during the holidays. So can anyone swear what his real name is? And I said, yeah, his name is Bob Smith, I swear. And he goes, fine, we'll release him. But it's just one of those things where that's one reason they can keep you if you want to stay in jail. Now, there's also cases, again, going back to the civil rights movement and other movements of, I think, more anti-war, where 100 people might risk arrest, and none of them will have ID, just to screw with the system. It was just to sit in jail, which they had no room for them anyway, but they would just sit in jail, not providing IDs. But that's a tactic. That's something that can be done if you have a lot of people, which really depends on the movement. But yeah, if you had 200 people or whatever it might be, there's no room for you in the jail. I mean, there just isn't. It's a way to screw up the system, and the civil rights movement certainly did that. By the way, when I was in, real quick story, when I was in Georgia, when I was in jail, environmentalists.
Oh, you got muted.
I didn't do it. The point being is that in Georgia, we were the only white people in jail. Everyone else, they were people of color. But as I'm sitting in jail, I'm watching CNN, and there was a jail protest in support of us. It was amazing. It was a black pastor who had been MLK's. I did the research later. Hosea Williams was his name. He was a right-hand man, so to speak, a right-hand person for MLK back in the day, in the 60s. And he said to CNN, because I'm watching the news, he said, when I saw people being pepper sprayed and hit with flash grenades, I couldn't help but think how we were treated with fire hoses and dogs back in the 60s. So I don't know who these people are, but he brought like dozens of people there to do a jail protest for us. I remember thinking, that's what they are afraid of, all of us getting together, because I had this real strong feeling of total, not knowing, he had no idea who we were. Well, he knew we were protesting. He knew it was a decent cause, but he just did what was right. And so I'm sorry, I had to throw that in because it's one of those moments in your life where it was clear to me anyway what the dangers to the establishment of people actually all getting together and being on the same page or close enough to the same page. So I'm not sure if that answered any question. I just thought I'd throw that story out there.
Yeah, I think that that was a good answer. And I also wanted to take the opportunity, since you mentioned this jail protest that happened so long ago, to remind folks about the Jailhouse Lawyers Speak National Days of Action on August 21st and September 9th, the Shut 'em Down demonstrations, where there's been a call for people to go to their jails, prisons, detention centers, and demonstrate in solidarity with those who are currently incarcerated, currently, subject to slavery at the hands of the prison industrial slave complex. So definitely want to raise that call. People should check out the hashtag Shut 'em Down 2021. Follow Jailhouse Lawyers Speak, and also follow the new media initiative, Shut 'em Down Media, which is a partnership between Jailhouse Lawyers Speak and the Amend the 13th movement to abolish legal slavery in America. So definitely keep an eye out for those things. I just wanted to kind of add that at the end there. And then, of course, if there's no other questions, Chris, if you wanted to close us out, and I know that you have a longer presentation from NLG to share with us as well, and that will also be made available to folks along with this recording. So yeah, I'll let you close us out.
I think that's pretty much it. I mean, I think I covered some of the more basic things. Like the longer presentation is very informative, and it's a lot more dramatic than I am here. But again, as I mentioned several times, just remember your basic rights. The things that are basically on this card. It's really important. Again, I've given these presentations, and 5 minutes later, I see people talking to the cops. And I know people have seen me talk to the cops, which you're not supposed to be doing anyway, but I do it. And part of the reason I talk to the cops is that they can give up information to me. My wife jokes, she'll say, "Do these officers know what you've done for a living for most of your life?" And I go, "No, probably. I was a news reporter for mainstream media until I got tired of regurgitating lies for a living. That's why I left the Capitol. So I just can't do it anymore. These are lies. I know they're lying to me. They know that I know they're lying to me. I was a bureau chief for a wire service, but I just can't be part of that." So again, now I'm an editor for an daily online court publication, and try to do an objective job, but we look for certain stories, and they're not hard to find, where people are being falsely accused, where they have motions to suppress evidence because the cops have screwed up. So I feel I'm at least reporting things they're truthful, but they're not, they're better than what I did before. But the point is, I was trained to gather information, and I would have one lawmaker after the other when I was at the Capitol here say, "Who the hell are you? And where's that effect?" So I'm just a reporter. And they said, "But you're not like this other reporter." And they were right. It was a compliment. I wasn't quite as gullible as other reporters. And I wasn't quite as lazy as some other reporters might be. So I tried to do the right thing. I finally left because I felt I could not continue regurgitating lies, which is what I was doing, in some cases anyway. So, but just remember your basic rights. Don't be afraid. Don't run. And as we were saying earlier, if you get arrested at a protest, maybe you'll get a good. We can find, or someone can find for you a good civil rights attorney that can win a judgment for you and make it worthwhile for your time in jail. Although it's, like you mentioned, Jameer, it'll never work. It never even out. When I was beaten at a protest as a legal observer 20 years ago, I will say I never got any money out of it. But again, I helped get 3 officers fired or encouraged to leave their jobs. So there was some satisfaction there. And that's all I really wanted to do. I wanted to make sure they weren't out there. But now we all know, I didn't know this 20 years ago, they probably got a better job down the road at some other police agency. I did not know that then. But now we do know that's what's been happening. So those are the changes that have to be made. But that's pretty much it. I'm hopefully I didn't ramble too much, and you can look at the more detailed a video that goes into your basic rights and what you should do or not do.
All right. Thank you again. Thank you to the NLG, and we'll continue on with what we're doing as far as building the various different initiatives and the autonomous infrastructure mission. And we'll say the struggle continues, and can't stop, won't stop. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.